I've got Martin Pennington here with me. Lovely to have you with us, Martin. We've had these chats a couple of times, but it's been a couple of months since we had the last one. So I'm looking forward to getting into this. And I think you better start before YouTube or someone shuts us down again.
Nice to see you again, David.
So we're talking about doves.
Yes, doves in the Bible.
So what can you tell me? What have you? You've obviously been doing some digging.
Okay. Well, David, what do you think of first when you think of a dove in the Bible?
You mean particular stories? I mean, the story that jumps out at me is Noah, I suppose.
Okay.
You know, Noah releasing the two birds from the window of the ark.
Yeah, the raven and the dove. Right. I got my idea for this particular essay, which I wrote, from Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist. And do you remember what happened at the end of Jesus' baptism?
Yes, you've got the descent of the dove.
That's right. You've got the descent of the
dove.
The
descent of the Holy Spirit.
As a dove. Yeah, that's right. John chapter 3, verses 11 to 16. And John the Baptist is speaking, and he said, baptize you with water for repentance, but after me will come one more powerful than I, whose sandals I'm not worthy to untie. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire. And then most people don't realize this verse is in here. Verse 12, his winnowing fork is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. What does that remind you of, David? That particular verse is quite a strong one, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's imagery of the harvest, isn't it?
Yep, the harvest. And what is the harvest? Speak to us in the Bible. What is the harvest a metaphor for?
I mean, there's lots of those agricultural and harvest parables that Jesus tells in Matthew. I think it's chapter 13, isn't it? You've got various harvests, and it's often aligned with the end of the world,
that's what I'm looking for.
The coming judgment, all those sorts of images.
Yep. Exactly. The end of the world, the coming judgment. Okay, but we're going to look into this a bit more deeply this morning. We're going to look at the whole concept, and I know that you've been doing this recently, David, in some of your services and some of your sermons, talking about the end times. But here we're actually talking about a change that's taking place. It is an end. It is a ceasing of something, at the end of something. But of course, we know from the writings that Swedenborg doesn't believe in ends. The writings tell us something about the end of something, which is that the end, like the end of life, is nothing more than a new beginning. And that's a powerful truth that the writings present to us. Even the end of life is really just a new beginning. And when we read about what's waiting for us in heaven, most people have no idea what's waiting for them in heaven. But we know, don't we? Because the writings tell us exactly what will happen from the moment we close our eyes in death to the following 3 days, where all kinds of different things, we float, as it were, between the worlds, to when we are met by angels and friends from this life, and then taken to wherever it is we wish to be, we are most comfortable with when it comes to heaven. And so it's a new start. But we're looking at a bigger picture here when we speak of Jesus being baptized by John. It's the beginning of his ministry, and what is his ministry going to lead to, David? Jesus' ministry.
Jesus' ministry, earthly ministry, will lead to the cross, the crucifixion, and then the resurrection.
Yeah, but what on earth specifically?
A re-establishment of a new spiritual era. Swedenborg terms it a new church.
A new church, a new era is a good way of putting it. His Jesus' baptism and rising up out of the water and the appearance of the dove is the beginning of the Christian church that Jesus founded, and that he passed on to his disciples, and then they passed on to all their followers, and that's what grew into the Christian church. So we see that this dove here, or I'm going to tell you that this dove here represents in a certain way the beginning, a new beginning of the church. Let's get a picture. There's an inspirational picture. That's quite a nice one. That was made by AI. Okay, so this is one of the incidents of the dove in the Bible. Now we're going to go to the one you mentioned first, David, the dove in the time of Noah. And from Genesis chapter 8, verses 8 to 12, then Noah sent out a dove to see if the waters had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove found no place to rest her foot, and she returned to him in the ark, because the waters were still covering the surface of the earth. So he reached out his hand and brought her back inside the ark. Noah waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove from the ark, and behold, the dove returned to him in the evening with a freshly plucked olive leaf in her beak. So Noah knew that the waters had receded from the earth. And Noah waited 7 more days and sent out the dove again, but this time the dove did not return to him. Now, why is this significant? Why is Noah doing this specifically with a dove? Now, we know he sent out a raven as well, and that has its own significance. But once again, this dove, I'm going to put to you, David, represents the beginning of a new church. And what were these? What was this new church that was beginning here? With in the age
Noah is if following Swedenborg's work, it's the ancient church, moving on from the most ancient church prior to Noah.
Exactly. Yeah. So Swedenborg divided the churches in the history of mankind up into 5 of them. I think that's right. The most ancient, the ancient, the Jewish, the Christian, and then the new church, the church that Swedenborg claims to have founded through his writings. And I'm going to let you in on a secret at the beginning of this, that a dove appeared or was associated with each of the new churches as they were brought into the world, except the most ancient. The ancient church had a dove. In this situation we're about to talk about was the dove coming from the ark. And then the Jewish church had involvement with doves in a slightly different way, which we're going to look at. And then the Christian church was Jesus being baptized and the dove coming down on him at the baptism. And that was the beginning of Jesus' ministry and the beginning, you could rightly say, of the Christian church. And then again, after the Christian church and the new church, there is also a dove represented. And that's quite an interesting story in itself. But we're looking at Noah, and we're seeing that Noah, we know that Noah was asked by the Lord to build an ark. Why was he asked to build an ark, David?
It was to save all the creatures or at least, the species on the planet from the flood.
From the flood, exactly. So here was a flood. Why was the flood coming? Who sent the flood?
According to the story, the literal story in the Bible, it was God.
It was God. And why did he?
God knew it was coming, and God commanded Noah to build the ark to avoid the consequences of a great deal of water on the planet. Yep.
And why did God send the flood?
Oh, the evils of mankind. Is that the way that it's put? Something along those sorts of lines?
Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 to 8. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was altogether evil all the time. This is very harsh stuff, isn't it? Powerful stuff. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved about it. So the Lord said, I will blot man out. He's not playing around here. I have created from the face of the earth every man and beast and crawling creature and bird of the air. For I am grieved that I made them. Noah, however, found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So Noah built the ark, and just as he finished, God's promise came true, and the rain came down, and only those, it even says the people were hammering on the door, trying to get Noah to let them in, but he was unable to open the door because God had closed it. So the ark lifted. And how long did the flood last, David? We're told a specific.
So 40 days and 40 nights is the rainfall, but of course it took time to subside, of course, after.
Okay. And what's the significance of being 40 days and 40 nights, David?
Well, it reminds one of the temptations of Jesus. It also reminds one of the children of Israel wandering in the desert for 40 years.
That's right. That's right. So it's a powerful number. It's one of these numbers that has a lot of powerful meaning. The children of Israel in the wilderness, as you say, and the temptations of Jesus in the wilderness, and the flood. And I put it to you that these are times of great struggle and punishment, if you like. And so the ark floated on this flood water for this period of time, and then eventually, as the waters began to recede, the rain stopped and the waters began to recede, and then Noah opened a window in the upper part of the ark, and he let out a raven first, and then after that the raven didn't come back, and then after that he let out a dove. And the dove went out first and then came back again, and then he went out and he came back with a leaf in its mouth. Thank you. There's a picture of Noah. It probably wouldn't have been quite as old as that, but anyway, it's good. It's a good picture. And the third time the dove came back with an olive leaf in its mouth. And you remember the last talk, one of the last talks we did had a bit on leaves and olives and fruit and things like that. We talked about that. And so that was Noah. So we had Jesus and Noah. And the third example of a dove is quite different. These two doves were living doves, and they were involved in the life of the people. Even though the dove that Jesus that came down rested on Jesus, you rightly said, represented the Holy Spirit, and the dove that was involved with Noah was a flesh and blood one. In fact, one that was sent out from the ark. Do you think that the other dove, we're told that there were only a couple of doves, although now that I think of it, some of the birds, there were more of them taken on board. I'm just wondering if the other dove on the ark managed to find the first one that Noah had sent out. It must
One
have.
does presume so.
Yeah, it must have, or we wouldn't have any doves today, would we? That's just a little silliness there, David. So then the third dove then is actually part of the transition from the ancient church which was the second church, to the Jewish church. Now, when in the time of the beginning of the Jewish church, we have Moses writing out a whole set of laws. And those laws gathered together in a book in the Bible called the Book of Leviticus. The Leviticus is because it was written by the Levites, or practiced. It was practices done by the Levites. And one of these rules, and we find in Leviticus chapter 12, verse 3, is the law of what happens when a woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a child. This is recorded for us in Leviticus 12, verse 3. And the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, a woman who becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. And then the woman must wait 33 days to be purified from her bleeding after the son is born. If she gives birth, though, to a daughter, she has to wait 2 weeks. With a son, it's only 1 week, but with a daughter, it's 2 weeks. And the woman will be unclean as during her period. Then she must wait 66 days, that's 2 months, to be purified. And the days of her purification, when the days of her purification of a son or daughter are over, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance to the tent, to the tabernacle, a year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or dove for a sin offering. And he shall offer them before the Lord to make atonement for the woman. She will be ceremonially unclean of her flow of blood. So it's interesting that if a woman gives birth to a male child, she only has to wait a week for her cleansing, and then only a month after that before she's allowed to return to her normal way of life. But if she gives birth to a daughter, she has to wait 2 weeks before she's clean or pure again. And then she has to wait 2 months before she can return to her normal life. This sounds very unfair, doesn't it, David? That
it does rather.
Yeah, we're kind of lucky that women don't have control over what gender their baby is. Otherwise, I'm sure that women would mostly go for boys, which I think traditionally most civilizations in the past have put a value on boys over girls anyway. But why do you think this is true, David? Why do you think she was able to return to normal life only a month after a boy, but had to wait 2 months for a girl?
You've got me there, really, Martin. I don't know. I mean, other than cultural factors, I can tell you a story actually. When my wife was pregnant with our first child, who was a daughter, as it turns out, we were living in Sydney, and at that time, Pam went for an ultrasound and asked, is it a boy or is it a girl? And they wouldn't tell us.
Oh, yes.
And they wouldn't tell us because there were issues apparently with people who were throwing themselves downstairs and things if they were told they had a girl.
Goodness.
So it's something that continues, even today, the preference to have a son is quite strong, especially in, I think, particularly Middle Eastern cultures.
Still. Yeah, that's correct. I must confess that having 4 children, at no stage were we forbidden from. In fact, we asked the question, do you want to know or not? We were invited to, and I think from memory, all 4 times we said yes, it would be nice to know, just so, because there are different preparations, like what color outfits you buy and things like that.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah.
But the thing is that a male child represents a truth that we discover, whereas a female child represents an affection for that truth. We're going to look at this a little more in depth after we've dealt with the fourth dove. And an affection is basically takes longer to deal with. It takes longer. Would you say that that's true in your experience, David? An affection takes longer to receive and to feel, whereas a truth is often more quickly.
I guess my reaction to that would be, I suppose that a truth is kind of quantifiable.
Yes.
It's a defined, there's a box around it. We can
Yeah.
understand it and quantify it and describe it
Yeah.
much more easily than we can an affection.
Yeah.
I remember going to a dinner. This is years and years ago, with a Muslim group actually, and we were, talking about like the idea of love,
Mm.
and they said, "Well, what is love?"
Mm.
Because we have some, it's something we aspire to, but it's something we have a great deal of difficulty actually describing and nailing down. Truth is
Feeling.
something much more definable, I feel.
Yeah, feeling, David. And the African Americans have this word, "Do you feel me, man? Can you feel me, man?"
Mhm.
And I think that's a lovely way of putting it. And it is very significant, David, and has an impact on so many things. The way that we feel love, but we understand truth, or we can, in a sense, acquire truth, like you say, like as in an object.
Mm,
Whereas love, you can't acquire
mm,
love. There's that lovely one of my favorite songs is, "I want to know what love is. I want you to show me." you know,
mm,
and that's a very real question, because certainly when people fall in love, you'll often hear them saying things like, I don't know what's happened to me. I can't explain it. I can't
mm.
get my head around it.
Yeah.
And this is so true. And in fact, not very long ago, I came to the realization, I was considering the idea that we cannot know the Father. We can know the Son, and the Son can reveal the Father to us, but we cannot know the Father directly.
Mm,
A lot of people think, "Oh, is this because God's far away, or, up in the upper parts of heaven? Is this why it's like that?" No, the simple reality is that we cannot know the Father because the Father is love, and we cannot
mm.
know love.
We could go down a whole other rabbit hole with that one, couldn't
Oh
we?
yes, oh yes, and maybe I will, because it is something I'm working on.
A topic for another day. Fabulous.
Yeah, but it's very much the whole impact of the Trinity, and trying to get your head
Mm,
around the Trinity
mm,
comes into that. Um, so then, yeah, and this is the difference between a daughter, giving birth to a daughter, and the time involved, and giving birth to a son. But of course, we didn't come to this passage to look at that. We came to this passage to look at the idea of a pigeon or a dove
mm,
being offered along with a lamb. But it goes on to say that if the woman cannot afford a lamb, she can bring two doves, um, or two pigeons. And there we go. There are two doves there that the woman's brought with her, to the priest, and then the priest will offer those doves on an altar. He will burn them up, and make an offering out of them. A lot of people confuse offerings with sacrifices. They think a sacrifice is something you give up, but it's not really the same. An offering, which is the word much more common in particularly in Leviticus, is something which is given willingly. And I think that that's an important distinction that people should think about. We need to get rid of this idea of sacrifice that's so many people talk about, because a sacrifice is obviously generally not something given willingly, whereas by contrast, an offering is. Um, but
mm,
this dove. Now, there's another point to be mentioned here, which will come up in the next dove, and that is the idea that this dove is given as an offering for the birth of a child. And the birth of a child in this situation, what does birth represent, David? Do you want to take a stab at that one?
What does birth represent? Goodness me, I've never really thought about that one. Well, yeah, it's a new awakening, a new realization. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we are asked to be born again. Jesus claimed that we should be born again to the ruler, who said, "Oh, what? That's not possible. What do I have to go back into my mother's womb and be born out of that?" No, Jesus says to be born by the Spirit, and this is quite significant. So this dove was offered as a birth, and of course, to be born again as a Christian is no different than a church beginning again, a new church beginning. And we know once again that this dove represented all these laws being given in Leviticus by sorry about this. There we go. These laws being given in Leviticus represented the beginning of the Jewish church. I have my phone on silence and still it's making a
it's
noise.
misbehaving.
Very much.
It's only continuing the theme of the day, Martin. We've had technology misbehaving all the way through, so
That's right. We have
it's just
to.
joining in.
We have to. And of course, so that once again, let's get to the main point. Once again, we have a dove. We have the laws being given about the offering of doves at the beginning of a new church, which was the Jewish church. Now, you might, if you're thinking on this very deeply, you might wonder, well, why are the doves killed in this situation, whereas in the other three situations, the doves are very much alive? And this may point to the idea, as Swedenborg tells us, that the Jewish church wasn't really a full church. It was a symbolic church. And that's something that possibly people who are familiar with the writings will be interested in, because they know where Swedenborg talks quite a bit about the difference between the Jewish church and the other churches that have existed throughout man's history. So then finally, after that, we get to the fourth church. And the fourth church, in fact, is told to us by Swedenborg. In the Christian Bible, we are told, especially in Revelation, we are told about the return of Jesus. And Swedenborg, without any apology, said, well, the return of Jesus was the beginning of the new church, and wrote his books and his experiences as a way of ushering in this new church, which he quite unapologetically said took over from the Christian church. But one of the things that Swedenborg wrote about, an incident or an event or a story, was when he entered into heaven one day and went to visit some angels who were actually female angels. Now, of course, Christians barely understand who angels were. They barely understand that angels were human beings, not a separate race of God's servants or messengers, but are actually human beings who have died, who lived on earth, died, and have gone into heaven. So we know that Swedenborg says all angels were originally human. There are no angels that were not originally humans living on earth. in the book Swedenborg wrote called Conjugial Love, which is in fact married love, Swedenborg's words which are used for married love. And so a lot of what's in this book is a discussion of what marriage is and what it's meant to be, but the idea that there is in fact marriage in heaven, even though many Christians claim, based on this verse in the Gospels, that Jesus said there was no marriage in heaven. Swedenborg said, no, there is marriage in heaven. And it's important that there is because of what marriage represents. Marriage is a metaphor for. In Conjugial Love, number 156, Swedenborg writes, at this point I respectfully ask the maidens, the wives, to reveal something of the secrets to me about conjugal love. And immediately they looked towards the window to the south, where suddenly a white dove appeared. Its wings shone as though with silver, and its head was adorned with a crown, seemingly of gold. And it was standing on a branch which had an olive growing out from it. And as they saw the dove engaged in an attempt to spread its wings, the wives said, we will reveal something to you because the dove has appeared. And so we are allowed to. And they said they told Swedenborg that they could only speak to him about the secrets of marriage when there was a dove appeared. Now, some people think that this was because, you know, the secrets of marriage are that the wives were being a little bit coy, you know, a little bit private about what went on in their marriages. And that's an easy assumption to make when you read this story. But in fact, David, I believe that what was really happening is that the women were being careful about the changes were to come about in marriage because it was a new church, and that church hadn't properly been embedded in the world. Its truths had not been dispersed through Swedenborg's writings to the people there, and the women were worried that these truths might be released too early, that people might take these truths, particularly when it comes to things like marriage, and particularly marriage in heaven, and distort them if they were introduced too soon. And I believe that this dove in the window was actually representing this process of the new church being established. And really, when you think about it, you can see how this might also be true in the situation of Noah sending out the dove, and the dove going back and forth, and Jesus needing to become baptized before he began his ministry, and how there is an effort made here. And even the Levitical rules and regulations that were given, there's an effort in each situation to protect the truth, so that it was only released as the church and as the church in the world was ready to receive it. And there's this process of protection taking place, even in the heavens, as Swedenborg was asking the women to comment.
One of the things I want to throw in, Martin, is just, you know, hearing you describe all of this, is the correlation between what goes on within an individual, the individual awakening, you know, referenced by the birth, and the wider societal human race level awareness. So for there to be that wider awareness, it often begins with a single individual, doesn't it? You know, someone has that enlightenment which they share, a realization they share with others, and gradually people catch on, and it spreads. And this is this is what I see here, just listening to you talk. There's this correlation between, I say, the individual level, which is, and Swedenborg uses this word church, doesn't he, as meaning the spiritual life within the individual.
Yeah.
And it only means it's only a church on a collective because of the church which exists on the individual level.
Absolutely. Swedenborg makes the statement, a man is the church, or a person is the church in its smallest form. And so the
And he
simple
does the same thing with heaven as well, doesn't he? I mean, he talks about an angel being a heaven in the smallest form in exactly the same way.
Yeah. Well, church is heaven on earth, where heaven exists as close enough to the reality that it can be, which is obviously based on how much the church lives the life of Christ in it. It is then also heaven in a physical form. The church is heaven in the physical form. And yes, you're right, David. It also the statement in the writings is man is heaven in its smallest form as well. So the short answer to your question is the birth of a church and the birth of an individual into the Christian life is in many respects the same event or the same type of event. The experience of a person coming into the church, coming into a Christian life, is his also the experience of him being made part of the church, and in a grander way, as you say, a new church. The birth of a Christian is you can call it a metaphor or a correspondence to the birth of a new church. And so I am talking about them, it's true, in an indistinguishable way, and that may have been a bit confusing for some people. So I'm glad you brought up that question, David, because it's an important question.
I just think they're so intimately correlated. It seems to me that you have to speak of them as though they are one and the same, because essentially they are.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of scale, really.
Yeah. And we could see the birth of Jesus, and the baptism of Jesus, and even as you talk, the death and resurrection of Jesus as also representing the birth and the life and the death of a church in the same sense, in the same way. And Swedenborg talks about it in terms of a day. You have the dawn of a day, and then you have the noontime of the day, the full sun shining, beating down on us in the middle of the day. And then you have the evening or the twilight of the day, the end of the day. And in a church, you see these same stages, same processes going through.
Yes. So as Swedenborg looks at the Gospels and the Gospel story, you have, I mean, Jesus calls everybody to pick up their cross and follow him. There's the same process on an individual level. And then he talks about, people in the Gospel story. And listening to you talk, I think of Peter and Peter's denial. Denial 3 times before the cock crows. Now, there's another bird for you. But and the thing is that Peter, that denial represents the death of faith. And that death of faith can happen again on that individual level or that widespread, humanity-wide sort of level. So he looks at individuals in the way that they reflect a more universal principle that goes on.
And throughout the Gospels, you can also see that transitional stage. People coming into beginning of the Gospels. Jesus was born, and then he came into a period of temptation, combat. Although the Bible only speaks of temptation briefly, we know that throughout his life, Jesus underwent temptation. And then you come to his crucifixion, which wasn't an end at all. Once again, death is not an end. It's just the end of before a new beginning. and Jesus undertook that as well. Perhaps we'll look now just briefly on birds and on doves, and on some of the natural things that we have talked about, and why they correspond to these things. So we look at birds. So what do birds represent? A very useful book in that people can get hold of or find online goes through it. It's called The Language of Parable, which talks about the correspondences of animals throughout the Bible. The Language of Parable, there, by William Worcester. Okay.
Oh, that's a nice copy. Yep.
Yep. And this goes
Very
through
good.
all sorts of correspondences: high, low, hot, cold, light, darkness, animal, vegetable, mineral. The things that I'm going to talk about now come from that book and from the chapter on birds. And we have some very lovely little comments here from Mr. Worcester. Birds give us an overview, even a preview of transformation ahead of us. And as we're going through, we can look, let's draw our attention to this process of a new church coming into existence, a preview of the transformation ahead of us. So we could say that these birds, these doves, represent the fact that we are looking forward to a new church in this situation. Even though it might be helpful for us to have this future view, we have not participated yet in this new thing that's ahead of us. We're only getting a picture of what's ahead. And the reason that we get this forward-looking picture is because the move forward in a new church is the experience of regeneration, which is often associated with highs and lows, but often with difficulties. Why would it be important for us to get a picture of what's ahead of us before we have to, as it were, become immersed in something? Why would it be valuable?
You'd give up.
Yeah.
You'd give up if you didn't have it. I mean, that, as you're talking about that, I think about the honeymoon state. The beginning of a marriage, everything's wonderful. It's you really haven't done any hard work as yet. You're just enjoying each other's company, and so yes, but it's much later, of course, in the marriage that things
and in fact
there's difficult at times.
There's an even more powerful something you can say about marriage, which is the idea of romance. David, how do we differentiate romance from real love? And people will people who have been wise in this area talk about the difference between romance, which is the exciting feelings and experiences that we have, and love itself. And they say things like, love is not a feeling. Love is not a feeling. It's an act of the will. And romance very much is a feeling, is an emotion. Romance is what draws us into a relationship with another person in a delightful, reassuring, and rich way. But it hides something. It hides a lifetime of serving your partner and of forgiving your partner. And so this romance which comes first is not the marriage. And in fact, sometimes people can make the mistake of thinking that it's going to last when romance doesn't last. And many people will agree that it doesn't last. But it's not to say that
There's
love has not lasting.
there's the birth of the girl in the
Yeah,
Jewish tradition.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much there. The feelings, all the feelings are there. In fact, Mr. Worcester says in another place, we need to not mistake a bird for a horse. What does he mean by not mistaking a bird for a horse?
So what's
A
the
bird.
definition, or what's the representation of a horse? I suppose it's
Okay, so what's the
that's what
representation?
he's pointing at, isn't he?
Yeah. So what do we use horses for? A uh,
Work,
a rule of
travel.
thumb. A rule of thumb when it comes to metaphors or correspondences
Mm,
is what's the use that we
mm,
put that, not the animal itself, but what's the use that we put it to. And of course, a horse is something that carries people or pulls a plow or does
mm,
heavy labor or pulls a cart. It does the heavy moving, if you like.
mm.
And in marriage, of course, in love, married love, that is the heavy shifting that's being done. Whereas by contrast, hitch up a plow to a bird, and
You won't get very far.
absolutely nothing would happen. But the bird can lift us up, as it were. Um,
Mm.
what's the song? Love lifts us up where we belong, which is
Oh
lovely,
yes, okay.
lovely words. But I think once again, it's an example of the mistake people make. But love, yeah, love lifts us up and
Mm,
shows us in a romantic, that through romance, that picture of what our
mm,
marriage could be. But it's the horse part of us that is able to do the hard work of that marriage requires for two people to live together in continuous love for one another. Very important point there. A horse or an oxen carries you step by step through laborious reasoning into a new state or a bringing of some new element into your life. And of course, there also includes, we've talked about a bit already, is the temptation combat, so it's the struggle to grow as an individual. And I've often said to people, you will never grow so much through your life, um, except that you are connected or are in a deep relationship with another person, or literally married to another person. That is where the real growth takes place in life. And some people aren't given the gift of marriage, um, but so that's not their fault. But yeah, I would recommend that if you really want to grow as a Christian, you need to be married, because that's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, um, in your life, and that is the horse. But we're talking here about doves and about birds. So yeah, Mr. Worcester quotes the verse, beautiful verse from Isaiah, one of my favorite verses actually, Isaiah 11, verse 31. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not grow weary. They shall walk and not grow faint. And what is this telling us about the overview of the bird? I believe it's telling us that it can be very powerful, like an eagle, very high,
mm,
um, and that I'm one individual who believes very strongly on the idea of a dream to live your life by. Some people call it a North Star, and this. I actually have read this verse when I was 18, and have it has been a strength to me.
mm,
There's a saying, lean upon the dream. And sometimes, as we've touched on already, when life gets really tough, the only way you can move forward is by saying, well, I've been doing everything I can to fulfill what I believe to
mm,
be ahead of me in my life. And that's the dream. And that's the bird view. looking at that bird view when time gets really tough. So we see that and we think of that in the sense of the eyes of birds, which are are often quite long. I think we might have talked about this in previous times, but I've often noticed the kookaburras and magpies in my garden sitting on a very high branch and just sitting there quietly looking, and then you'll see their head stop and their beak will turn down and they'll be looking very hard, and then they'll dive bomb from this branch straight to the ground. They won't change direction, straight to the ground. Their beak will go out and they'll grab a worm, which they saw from so high up. And so there's that long-sightedness, which once again speaks to us of that dream or that North Star or that wisdom of what can be achieved, even when times get tough. So what then distinguishes a dove as a bird? And we've already touched on this. I think we talked about the lamb in the sacrifice, or in the offering rather, that the priest makes. And what would you say is the strongest representation of a lamb, David?
Oh, I always think of innocence.
Yeah, innocence, exactly. And in doves, this is the same. Not all doves are white, and as I have noted, there's no real distinction between a dove and a pigeon. In pigeon is the French English word, and dove is the French word for pretty much the same bird. But doves are pigeons that have been carefully bred to have those beautiful white feathers and to be very kind of in displaying those feathers as we saw in some of the pictures. And so there's that innocence there. Now, what is innocence? Innocence, in terms that Swedenborg talks about it, is the lack of hidden motives. Let me make very clear that when Swedenborg speaks of innocence, he's not talking about sinlessness. He's not talking about people who are just so good they could never do anything wrong. But what Swedenborg is talking about is a lack of an agenda, is our openness and our willingness, even in our sinfulness, to open ourselves up to the Lord, to allow Him to see into our life and to correct us, basically. No agenda, no hidden motives. Obviously, when it comes to the situation of a new church, which I've been talking about, how the dove which is involved in, and a new life, one of the things that's very important is this innocence and this unwillingness to foresee or to pretend that we know what is ahead of us, what this church is going to be, and
And in a sense, we can't possibly know what's ahead of us.
No, we can't.
We have, because in that state and at that stage, we have no sense. We only have a sense of what's behind us.
But even
we
more,
have an idea of what we might expect, but that's often challenged, I think.
But even more important, I think, than that, and that's certainly a good point, David, but I think even more significant is our anticipation of what the new church might be coming. When people talk about the apocalypse or the end of time, they often have half an eye on the idea of where they will be in this new situation. And we remember the disciples saying to Jesus, well, who will sit on your right-hand side or your left-hand side when we in heaven, which one of us? And Jesus, as he often did, converts this immediately into who will have, what positions will people have in the new church that he is ushering. And people, particularly, like I say, with the apocalypse, people always talk as if they're going to be the ones that finish up on top. And this is an agenda, you know, and this is
Yes.
distortion. This is not innocence. This is the opposite of innocence. So that's something we have to consider. And by the same sense, people become so-called Christians just so that they can, be thought well of by other people, or finish up in a better place when it comes to judgment. That's the wrong attitude. That's the wrong reason to join the church.
Yeah. In reality, it's no better than jostling for position in Putin's cabinet at the end of the day, is it?
Except that maybe you live to tell the tale. Generally in church, in a Christian church, your life is not demanded. You don't get thrown out of a window, as they say. And there's another side to the lack of innocence that we probably should talk about, and this is probably my last point. Going back to the discussion of the offerings of made for a boy child and a girl child, the inner sense of this idea and the offerings and the cleansing and all of this sort of thing talks to us about, as a Christian, or as an immature Christian, a childlike, an infant style Christian. One of the first parts of our walk, of our experience, one of the first challenges that we face is, and Swedenborg talks about this quite a lot, is that we feel the Lord doing things in our life and we become very carried away with this behavior, with these things that the Lord is doing in our life. And we make the terrible mistake of taking it on ourselves, of attributing these changes in our life to ourselves, instead of attributing them to the Lord. This is a very immature state of coming to the Lord and of allowing him to do things in our lives. We attribute these things to ourselves, and this is a lack of innocence. This is an impurity that takes place, especially in the early parts. And so part of the reason, in fact, that it comes out in these Levitical laws that the woman is impure, is that we are taking credit for what the Lord is doing in our life. And the reason there is a difference between a boy who is understanding and thought and a girl who is feeling emotion and affection, is because to think something that's very smart is wrong, but the delusion of doing that doesn't last as long as to see an improvement in our behavior or a deepening in our affections, which we talked about as being a girl child. That lasts longer, and that takes longer to get over, to get beyond the impurity of taking the credit for that upon ourselves. And this is why there's a difference there.
So to sort of rephrase that, just to make sure I'm hearing you. So to take an idea, an intellectual idea, and attribute it to my own cleverness,
yep,
it is more easily dealt with than the desire to be right, be good. That desire takes much longer to work out, to counter, to develop something more pure.
So I guess I'm really orienting it more towards, away from desire, and more towards the pride of seeing new things in our life. And instead of giving the credit to Jesus for producing those new things in our life, we take the credit from ourselves. How do you often recognize something good happening in your life is when people comment on it. And many Christians will be able to give the testimony that, I hadn't really been thinking very much about the change that comes about when you become a Christian. But people started to saying to me, "You've changed. You're different." Especially if it's a big change, you stop swearing and you stop being nasty and unkind to people and you stop being selfish. And a huge problem Swedenborg points out, especially in the early part of our Christian life, is that we tend to automatically take the credit for that. Our relationships are very mature, like a child, like an infant, our relationship with the Lord, and we often do not give that credit where it should be given, which is to the Lord working in our life. And there is this impureness, this
It makes me think of the word merit. Is that what you're chasing?
well, yes, when we
attributing something to oneself.
Yep, making merit, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. That needs, and it's these desires, this selfishness that we need to be purified from, just like the woman needs to be purified from this.
Been very interesting chatting, and it's made lots of connections for me that I had not thought of before. I'd not done a study on the doves, so it was very interesting to do and see the connection between the doves and the new awakening spirituality as that's emerged through the through the history,
Yeah.
and in our own lives. That's been quite fascinating. So thank you for leading us through that.
Let me just finish up by saying the things that are most important to the Lord, such as the birth of the church, as well as the birth of a child. And we are told by the writings, of course, that the reason we have a physical world is so that the inhabitants of heaven can come into existence, can be born, because all angels, as I said before, originally began as babies on earth. And the reason that we have babies is associated with various forms of love, the love of marriage and the love of physical relationships. And it's appropriate that these loves would be so powerful because they are producing something so significant, that the love of marriage and the love of the physical relationships goes on to produce children in the world, who then go on to eventually enter into the world of spirits, and if they become angels, to fulfill heaven. And in the same way, the birth of an individual into the church and the joy of belonging to the church is also a great love. So I'll finish off there. And yeah,
well, Martin, it's been useful and enlightening to me, and I look forward to future studies, future things we might look at and dive into. So, thanks for your time. It's been good.